Are we good?
We're good. We are live.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Um, oh, me and technology don't mix. We do not mix. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of our new show, Seduction of the Innocent. Um, First and foremost, I am Mary. I am a senior editor for On Comics Ground. I'm also the head of public relations, but that's really neither here nor there. And with me here is Kai.
Hi. I am the marketing director for On Comics Ground, which is, the fancy way of saying I put stuff together. I am the co-host of Aggressive Negotiations, which you can watch on Mondays here on this channel. I write books and I stream video games. This is going to be fantastic. How are you tonight, Mary?
I'm doing okay. Like I said, I've got a bit of a dry cough, but we will get through this.
We'll be
Well,
fine.
Since this is a new show, we kind of wanted to focus our first episode on kind of setting things up because this one's going to be a little different. We wanted to launch a show that looks at the way historical events and politics have impacted comics over the years. And now, when I say politics, I'm not talking about, this book has a leftist leaning or this person is conservative. No, I'm talking about how World War II would have changed the landscape of the Golden Age, because they were essentially propaganda at times. Excuse me, how basically how comics reflect the world around us. Like, for example, in the New Mutants, Karma was a refugee of the Vietnam War. So, God, it sounded so much smarter in my head,
I feel like it always does. It's the same thing with me. It's just like, hi, I'm this, and then you can have it.
Get me.
Okay, pause. Let's restart.
But no, we want to look at the effects of things that have shaped comics. For example, a future episode we want to do is how propaganda images around the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 affected Asian stereotypes in comics in the early 30s, and then how that rolls into anti-Japanese sentiment and stereotypes during World War II in comic books. So we want to, air quote, deconstruct this a bit. And I think it's a really interesting topic and one that I think we're really excited to get into.
I'm super excited. I'm really open about being more of like a casual fan and not knowing jack shit about comics, like where they come from. Like, I read a comic and I like it and I'm like, okay, that was fun, and then I put it away. And I've been like reading comics and enjoying the media ever since I was a kid, but I've never really looked at the history of stuff. So I'm like total filthy casual, right? So I'm excited to be along for this ride, as much as you are teaching me about all of this stuff. So
excited to talk about it.
Super excited to talk about it. I am super excited to learn more about what sort of stuff actually did, shape the comics industry, and that's why I'm super excited to be here. Teach me,
and
master.
I feel like what kind of helped give birth to this. What'd you say?
Teach me, master.
What'd you say?
Teach me, master.
No.
It took all three of those. How's your ego? This is gonna end.
No,
with a Star Wars reference, because that's what I do on Monday nights, is the Star Wars thing, and it's gonna just be like, at the end of this, it's like, I have become the master now. And then we're gonna have to have a lightsaber duel.
Yep. But I think what kind of helped give birth to this show is the fact that I was a political science major in college, and I've been reading comics consistently for pretty much my entire life. And you take one thing and the other thing and you smush it together. And I feel like this can also sort of justify buying as many comics as I do. And, comics are a legitimate form of literature. They're a legitimate form of artwork. And, frankly, all art is inherently political. And pretty much all politics are affected by history. So it would make sense that these would converge. Because, we look at the political and historical influences of, Renaissance artwork and whatnot. Why can't we do that with a medium that is so prevalent in our popular culture? Because with the rise of the big superhero boom as of late, when these books do draw on their source material, they begin to affect the world at large. Superheroes have always played a part, and that is due by and large of the fact that DC Comics have existed since the late 30s. And we have the introduction of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman within roughly 5 years of each other. And they're all pushing 80. Wonder Woman hit 75 a few years ago. They all look fantastic for their ages, by the way. That's the joke I always make.
I'm still convinced that Batman has had a few surgeries.
Yeah, he's had some work done.
He's had a lift.
Is that why the cowl covers the face? Get rid of some of those crow's feet. Oh, come on, we all know Bruce Wayne is gonna be vain.
The one botched facelift that he hasn't been able to laser surgery away. That's why they keep casting younger and younger Batman.
Yes. I like that because sidebar, Robert Pattinson has been cast as Batman for the upcoming Matt Reeves Batman movie, and I love that they're already calling him Battinson.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It's exciting.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah. So we want to look at all of these influences and see what dots we can connect. I will admit that, some of this is not... some of it is going to be slight conjecture on my part, and I want to be transparent about that. But, some of these things, when you do a deep dive and you read supporting material and whatnot, the lines are there. And I can't say that, here's a stack of all of these academic works, that have been written about comics. Like, yes, there are some, but there's not a lot. And I'm not sitting here saying that everything I say is going to be the gospel truth. I'm probably going to make mistakes. But, if I find something that I may have been mistaken about, or if someone brings it to my attention, I will address it and say, hey, look, here's a correction. Because, sometimes with things like this, I almost like to be wrong, because then you get to learn more. I'm just, that's just my nerd thing like that.
It's a whole other side of the nerd culture, right?
Yeah.
The whole
before we really start...
Nerd culture. Sorry.
Yes. No, you're fine. But before we really begin to jump into the nitty-gritty of today's topic, I want to address probably the most quote-unquote controversial thing we have right now, which is the title of the show, and ironically, the topic of this episode. The title of the show, Seduction of the Innocent, is a reference to the book of the same name. And that book, which is written by Frederick Wertham, which we're going to get into here in a little bit, is the book that effectively broke comics. It ended the golden age of comics and led to the rise of the Comic Code Authority. And we're going to get into the details here in a little bit, but we kind of took the name to reference the impact of, these real world experiences on comics, in comics, excuse me. And, we wanted to take the biggest, arguably the biggest political influence and bring it here. So just kind of hit at the core of our message. So we're not necessarily here to try and argue some of his theses, but it'll probably come up. But, you know, let's be real here. I'm also being really cheeky. If you notice our background, it is definitely a reference to Persephone. Good job on that one with Kai. She was smarty pants who came up with that one.
I do that sometimes.
Yep.
like
now,
we have both admitted,
before
we are both nerds. Super. In
yeah,
different
ways. Absolutely. So before we get into talking about Wortham and the book and what the book covers and how it impacted everything, do we want to take a minute to talk about some of our other shows?
Yeah, we could totally do that.
Okay.
You wanna?
I will let you lead the charge on that one.
You want to do, as the McElroys say, head to the money zone?
Yes, let's do that.
All right, let's head to the money zone. All right, so, because we are hosted on Comics Ground, the Twitch channel on Comics Ground, we have, there's programming every single night, just about here on the channel. I run Monday nights. The Galaxy just got a whole lot closer. Aggressive Negotiations, the Star Wars podcast that I host, brings you a weekly roundup of news, reviews, and general discussion of everything to do with that galaxy far, far away. You don't need to be Force sensitive to enjoy this podcast. And as it is brought to you by On Comics Ground, tune in here on Twitch every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern for all of your Star Wars goodness. Saturday nights, Mary co-hosts the flagship title of On Comics Ground. James, Mary, and Travis do a weekly discussion of all things comics, reviews, news, thoughts, and surprises await you with Panel to Panel, the flagship podcast of On Comics Ground. The same content you love from oncomicsground.com, but spoken aloud. Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then our episode tonight is sponsored by Jacob Crawford. Just below the channel there is a link to their book. It is a YA paranormal. It's a paranormal YA. After a traumatic year, 16-year-old Roz is excited to move to Las Vegas, longing for a fresh start. Instead, she gets ghosts. With the help of her cousin, neighbor, and a pair of amateur paranormal investigators, Roz sets out to take on the specters herself. But the supernatural activity plaguing her only increases, and with it comes terrifying threats and shocking revelations. Worlds beyond ours, her mysterious powers, and beings that will kill her for them. Determined to stop the shadows from overtaking her world, Roz and her friends will put a stop to the looming darkness or die trying. There is a link. You can grab it on Amazon. The Shadows, Dark Sentinels, Book 1 by Jacob Crawford. Pick it up. Let us know what you think. And join us here on Comics Ground on Twitch for all of those other fun shows. All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this.
That would happen to me.
What?
Like, no, just want to say one thing. That would happen to me. I'd move to get a fresh start and then get attacked by freaking ghosts.
I mean, I swear my apartment is haunted. I swear it. We live next to a church, and I swear to God that there is there's a mausoleum kind of thing. It's not really. There's a monument. The guy who built this church is buried like 50 feet away from my apartment, and I swear I have seen the ghost of the guy. Like it freaks me out. It's freaky.
Oh jeez.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh Lord have mercy.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this.
Yes, because this is a trip. Buckle up for some just absolute, just nonsense. It's all bonkers. So, Seduction of the Innocent was written by psychiatrist Frederick Wertham in 1954. Wertham was a German-American psychiatrist. He had come over from Germany and previously had been providing low-cost psychiatric care in places like Harlem, and was seen at the time as something of an air quotes progressive. But he began to have some rumbling Damn it. See, I told you, you put me in front of a microphone and then I don't know what to do. He started to have some misgivings about comics. And he was catapulted into the mainstream spotlight with the release of this book. The book described depictions of violence, sex, drug use, and other quote-unquote adult themes within crime comics. Again, air quotes with crime comics, which is a term that he created, as it were. It was a blanket term to describe not only the gangster comics, which were popular at the time, but also to encompass superhero and horror comics as well. So that's kind of where things start to go awry in the first time. The first time is because, you know, he refers to superhero as crime comics.
You know why?
And right.
Like, I mean,
and you know, first of all,
probably doesn't help.
No. And you know, admittedly, there were some comics in the Golden Age that were very violent. I mean, you know, we're going to touch on it a little bit later, but there's a cover of an EC horror comic from the Golden Age with a man carrying a woman's decapitated head right there on the cover.
Really?
Yes.
I love it.
I will have to, I don't have it written down in front of me, but it's, yeah. No, it is considered probably the most notorious comic cover in history. Huh. So, you know, if you look at the foundational basis, he sort of had a point that, you know, these influences could be a bad thing, but it very quickly starts to spiral out of control. Because within the book, he talks about the impact of these images on children. And he is having a conversation that is really not different than the conversation about violent music or violent video games or, you know, sex on television. Excuse me. But within the book, he uses anecdotes and research that, you know, the anecdotes are largely undocumented. The research is poorly sourced. And when you're doing these kinds of things in a scientific atmosphere, that, you know, faulty research will just ruin the whole thing. And, you know, when reading the book, he almost hypes up the results. But many historians, excuse me, have brought up the fact that, you know, this research was so poorly sourced. I am talking myself into a dang circle.
So it's not that much different, from what's going on now.
Yeah.
He was basically one of the original sensationalists when it comes to pop culture. What you're telling me here is that he was doing just it's sensational. Oh, he's you know, he's breaking this new ground by saying, oh, these things that children are reading are not the wholesome Christian or whatever content that they should be reading, and it's going to make them do terrible things.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, and this is a personal point. I think, you know, one could argue that the more murdery comics should be kept out of the hands of children. But I think one of the problems that one of the many problems that Wortham has is he's running under the assumption that only children read and consume comic books. And at the time, that is fundamentally untrue. Pretty much everybody was reading them because, you know, they were sitting on the newsstand shelves, and you would pick one up, you'd buy it, you'd read it while you were waiting for the trolley, and, you know, a lot of times people would just throw them away.
Yes.
So it's funny to think about that, just how much, you know, quote, money today could have been thrown away because, you know, it was seen as really nothing more than a newspaper or a comic strip. It was just kind of there. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, and then once you get into World War II, there were these huge drives where you would turn in things like aluminum and paper and whatnot that could be used for the war effort. And kids were often encouraged to bring in their comic books to turn in for the war effort. So that's why there's so many valuable books from the Golden Age that there are believed to be so few. Because Action Comics #1, which is, and you'll have to fight me on this, I'm not doing a franchise thing here, but Action Comics #1, which is arguably the most important comic book in history, there are believed to be about 50 left in existence.
Wow.
It is a comic that, in very good condition, can sell it for millions of dollars.
And just for clarity, this is the first appearance of Superman.
This is the first appearance of Superman.
And there's only just because they were burning them or recycling them, I guess.
Or using them for
insulation.
As insulation, turning it over to the American war effort.
That's
so just
bonkers.
Go on.
Oh my god.
Go ahead. Uh-huh.
Oh my god. No, I
mean, because statistics. Go ahead.
No, I literally didn't know that. Like, it's I knew that they. Okay, so my comics knowledge is like, I knew that they were, you could get them at the newsstand, and they were like everywhere compared to now, where it's like you have to go to the comic store if you have one, or it's the way they're distributed now. Like, distribution today is ass backwards. It is ass backwards. Anyway. Sorry,
that'd be an interesting episode.
Yeah, no, I think we could totally do that as an episode. That'd be fun. But wow,
the evolution of the distribution of comics.
My heart. We're very overprivileged.
Because
we're very overprivileged right now. Like, to think about it. We don't have to worry about a war effort or things like that. We can literally just walk to the store, have our comics, put them in our bags and boards, and not worry. Like, the worst we have to worry about is downsizing our own stuff because we have acquired too much stuff. And I feel like I'm doubly privileged in this point because I'm Canadian. So, wow.
But, jumping into the back to the point where I think Wertha makes the mistake with the generalized assumption that really only children are reading comic books, I am reminded of a story that my grandmother told me. And my grandmother died several years ago at the age of 92. She was a young woman during World War II. And till the day she died, this woman was all about the war effort. Even, well into her 70s and 80s, still had a tiny little victory garden. And for those of you who may not know what a victory garden was, people were encouraged to grow their own fruits and vegetables during the war effort, so that way canned and preserved fruits and vegetables could be sent to the soldiers or used in, the quote-unquote war effort. And, we all know that oftentimes during the war, when the men would leave, women took a lot of jobs that were traditionally reserved for men. And my grandmother did a lot of office work in during the war, which, thinking about it now is kind of like, okay, she did office work, but in World War II it was a big thing because she worked in the office of a munitions factory, if I remember correctly. I don't remember why, but they wouldn't let her work the line, but I'm getting off topic. But one day I had been wearing a Wonder Woman t-shirt when we had gone to see her in Cleveland. And she pointed it out, and she remembered sort of that it was Wonder Woman. She was getting fairly old at this point and started to slip into dementia a little bit. But she talked about the fact that she was very surprised to see that Wonder Woman was still around. And I'm kind of like, well, yes, of course, Grandma, she is. Like, it made sense to me, but whatever. And she started to tell me a really interesting story, and one that genuinely sticks with me to this day, is that there was a girl in the office who would walk by the newsstand every day on her way to work, and she'd stop and she'd grab a handful of comics from the newsstand and she'd come in. And my grandmother said that all of the girls in the office, they'd, crowd around the various issues because, they were... comics weren't a serious endeavor. They were just kind of, these little things. And I know it's hard for us to think about it like that, but they were, it was kind of like newspapers, newspaper comics kind of a thing. Like, you pay attention to them, they're cute, whatever. But my grandmother said that she and all the other girls in the office would crowd around comic book issues with Wonder Woman because, there was this female superhero who was going around and punching Nazis, and she said that it kind of almost boosted their morale a little bit. That, they were doing something in the munitions factory to kind of help fight the Nazis, and to see this, powerful female hero being able to physically punch Nazis, like, it kind of boosted their morale a little bit. And I think that, this story serves as almost a counterpoint to Wertham's assumption. And I know it sounds like I'm kind of rambling a bit, but I cannot help but think that, God, just you put me in front of a microphone and then I don't know what to say. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am a dum-dum. But I think that this is kind of the opposite of Wertham's point, that the actual book itself is very dry, it's very poorly researched. And, granted, this is one instance, but this is an instance that, I'm connected to personally. I don't know, did any of what I just say make sense?
Yes. Oh, no, it made total sense. And it's humbling to think that, like, it's humbling to know that your grandmother still remembered Wonder Woman from when she was a young woman working in a munitions. Like, she remembers Wonder Woman specifically because of the morale boost that she got from reading these comics that, that in the book, in Seduction of the Innocent, were decidedly childish things, decidedly, adults don't read this sort of stuff, something that was very obviously not just something that children were reading, something that you see. There are pictures from the 20s or the 30s and 40s, yes, of, like, people just reading these comics at the newsstand, like, on, and there's historical documents and documentation rather, that, people were reading these comics and it wasn't just children. So having that anecdote, I can't talk either, from your grandmother, it kind of just throws all of everything in Seduction of the Innocent. Like, it obviously just throws it out of the window, and sort of.
And the book has a specific. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, thank you, Demented, for fun. They said I'm doing good. I've only had a few hours of sleep. I'm very tired, so my brain's running on like 25%. But the book carries a very think of the children narrative. And, that is something that we've seen time and time again. And I do believe the book itself is responsible for the continuing belief to this day that, quote, comics are for kids. And while, yes, there are kids who read comics, but not everyone who reads comics is a child. Like, you have, kid comics, you have young adult comics, you have, the larger comic market, which I would argue is targeted for older teens and adults. Mm-hmm. So I think this book, this is just one example of the effects that it is still having. And, we're going to get into some details that will truly frustrate some of you. And in the book, Wertham focuses on a lot of different genres, but he takes particular strike at superhero comics. And for the purpose of our show, that's sort of where we're going to stick, because arguably superhero comics and superheroes in general have had a much more impactful effect on society. So, I mean, whether you read comics or not, everybody, I mean, obviously with the rise of the MCU, you know all of these superheroes. You know, growing up, you knew who Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman were. Like, so this is kind of why we want to stick here. Um, so jumping into the book, Wertha made some very ridiculous and very difficult to prove claims. A lot of it is conjecture based on his own opinions. And I think the word I like to jokingly use is bonkerific claims that he made relate to the DC Trinity. In the book, he suggested that Batman and Robin were detrimental because they were obviously gay. That, you know, this is an older man and a young boy, and so of course it was, you know, very homosexual in nature, and it was leading children into danger. Because, you know, obviously Dick Grayson at the time was, God, maybe 12, 13. He was very young. But, you know, he was meant to be a stand-in for the kids reading the book. But, you know, he argues that, you know, this was encouraging children to run into danger and be gay. Wortham argues that Superman is the ultimate representation of fascist ideology because of the term Superman, which is if you translate that to German, is Übermensch, and you can, you know, connect that to, I believe it'd be Nietzschean. I don't know, like, because Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, and I'm just assuming it's Nietzschean, but that because, you know, he was invulnerable and he had super strength and could jump really high, that, you know, this was encouraging that kind of a fascist Übermensch ideology with the perfect man, even though he was seen as a very patriotic figure, you know, fighting for truth, justice, and the American way. That, you know, he was one of the quote unquote patriotic heroes in World War II. Like, he also punches Hitler. And the funniest to me is his claim about Wonder Woman. And for those, just a bit of background information, for those of you who don't know, I am a massive Wonder Woman fan. I always have been. I actually managed to track down an issue of Sensation Comics from the 1940s that I spent way too much money on. But I wanted a comic from every age. I have a 6-foot Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman cardboard cutout. Like, ask my wife how she ask my wife how she feels about that one.
Yeah. I would like to have her on the show one of these days. Like, we should get her on to yell at you about how innocent. Get her on, you know, episode 10 or so. We'll just get her on to yell at you about how comics have seduced your poor innocent mind and how Wonder Woman made you gay.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
boy.
I'm seeing in the chat that Demented for Fun points out that the original Superman comic was very different. I can only assume that they are referencing the character of Superman that came before Action Comics #1, which it was a very minor thing. I haven't read it in several years, but it was very different. Really? I would have to do some more background research on that. In Action Comics #1, Superman is just, you know, kind of a guy who goes around punching stuff. Like, in his first appearance, he ends up beating the crap out of someone who's beating his wife. And, you know, he does shift towards the more patriotic side of things once the war kicks off. But, there was a pretty sizable difference, between 1937 and in the early 40s when we as the United States got involved in the war. So, it was a little different. But Wortham wrote the book in 54, so there was time to for him to incorporate those more patriotic elements, but I'm wondering if Wortham targeted a specific branch. Oh, James, he's in the comments. He's a total fascist stopping wife beaters.
Oh yeah. Superman was 100%. He wasn't Superman created by Jewish men and was meant to be like a real
Siegel and Schuster, I do not remember if either of them were Jewish. I know one of them actually was from Ontario, so there you go.
Yeah, Canadian.
But you might be thinking of Kirby and Simon.
I know 100%
who
that
created
Kirby,
Captain America.
I know 100% they were.
Okay, thank you. Demented for Fun popped up, and yeah. The original story is that he was a bold psychic fascist. The same writers later created the character of Kal-El and used the name Superman. Thank you. That I remember having that image in my brain, but like I said, I have not read it in several years. So thank you for providing that information. But jumping back to his redonkulous claims about Wonder Woman, Wortham suggested that because of her power and her independence and her bucking of traditional, what we would call traditional gender norms now, that she was encouraging young girls to engage in lesbianism. That because she was an independent woman and, wasn't fawning over Steve Trevor, Marston's Wonder Woman is she is an absolute go-getter. There's a panel in her Golden Age comic where Steve Trevor asks, okay, Wonder Woman, when are you going to marry me? And her response is, when injustice is cleansed from the world, or something like that. So she is a very driven character, but all of that means that she's encouraging young girls to be lesbians.
I mean, I thought more... You'd think it was more... She was encouraging young girls to speak up, which, I mean, we probably need more of in today's society even, because not a lot has changed. Yeah. But, just everything that you're saying, everything that you're talking about today, it's just oh my god, it's a sensationalism that hasn't really changed in 80 years. And it's just it's just mind-boggling. My mind has been boggled. Even reading your outline for this, as we were doing our prep for this, I'm just sitting here and I'm like, you're making this shit up. You're making this up. This isn't real. I'm sitting here reading, Mary provided me with some wonderful notes, and I'm reading through them, and I'm going, no way, this is bullshit. You're making this up. And then I actually, she tracked down a digital copy for me, so I started reading Seduction of the Innocent, and I'm like, oh my god, she's not making this up. No, not the insanity of comics. The chat's being silly. Yeah, Kai, she made up all the insanity of comics. But no, I'm just talking about the whole background.
His claims.
The claims that this guy's made. I was like, no way have we not come that far. This can't be real. This can't be. And I'm just sitting here going, oh my god. And it's just literally my mind has been blown. Learning all of this stuff is crazy. Yes, because Wonder Woman is 100% promoting lesbian. 100% in those booty shorts with her lasso of truth coming from an all-female society in Greece. I mean, not really Greece, but from Greek mythology, which is why our images are like Artemis and Athena. That was the joke there.
And that's actually something I want to get into in a later episode is William Moulton Marston, Wonder Woman's creator, was a very, the word I'm going to use here is eccentric. He was a very eccentric man. He wrote some very interesting books. He had interesting opinions about what could be considered female supremacy. And he was once quoted as saying about Wonder Woman as she was the ideal woman who should rule the world or run the world. So I definitely think Golden Age Wonder Woman is something we need to get into.
Yeah, definitely.
Later on. Because yes, Doc Jones 11 pointed out The Secret History of Wonder Woman. Yes, The Secret History of Wonder Woman is a fabulous book written by Jill Lepore. Definitely read it. It goes into Marston's background, his family, both of his wives. But no, that is an episode we will definitely have to do, is looking at Golden Age Wonder Woman. And I do want to make a point that, in these 2 points with Batman and Robin and Wonder Woman, he targets homosexuality specifically. And there's a reason for this, because Wertham was a psychiatrist, and it wasn't until the early 70s that the American Psychiatric Association had removed homosexuality as a mental disorder. So at the time when Wertham is writing the book, homosexuality is seen as a mental disorder. So I think that's an interesting point to make, that he is literally arguing that these comics are making these kids sick. I mean, nowadays we look at it as kind of, the issue of homosexuality as a religious and moral objection. But, you have things like gay conversion therapy that go back to that belief. So when you look at it through that historical lens, the claim that Wertham is making kind of stops being funny. That, he's literally arguing that because Wonder Woman's strength and independence, that she is making girls sick. And I think that's when the book begins to shift. Like, yes, he has a point. Murdery, violent images are probably not good for kids, but he begins to make these claims out of nowhere. There's really no research if, Wonder Woman was making girls lesbians. And, the various figures he does have in the book are very small sample. Like, there are accusations that he manipulated his sample sizes, like, to get a little blunt, he kind of pulled all of this out of his ass, in my opinion. So, like I said, to get a little blunt. And this is the part in the conversation, when bringing that up, that I want to kind of take this out of the hilarity of the ridiculous claims in the book to the very real world implications of this book, because Wertham wrote this book at the time when McCarthyism was rampant in the United States. And for those of you who, because Kai is Canadian and other international friends who are going to listen to this, Senator McCarthy was a anti-communist, like almost violently anti-communist, and started a lot of the post-World War II Red Scare. I mean, literal persecution at times, people were accusing neighbors of being communists, kind of a thing. People were being arrested. You can look at the, I believe they were the Rosenbergs who were executed in the US for allegedly being communist agents, or Soviet agents. Like, that's kind of how far this went at the time. I'm not arguing, the guilt or the innocence of the Rosenbergs, but people were executed.
What?
And I
Oh
mean,
my
these weren't
god.
extrajudicial killings, they were put on trial, but I'm just arguing that it started to kind of get to that point. And it was that kind of fear mongering that existed in the 50s that really added fuel to Wortham's fire. And Wortham's book and air quote research caught the eye of members of Congress.
Okay.
Um, yes,
The chats
Doc
from
Jones Levin
the
is pointing
chats
out in the
from
chat that
yeah,
the
yeah.
Rosenbergs were found that they were found guilty of treason. So that is on me. I should have extrapolated my point a little better.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm like
But
getting a massive crash course in American politics and history here, and it's just like I'm like taking notes. I'm sitting here like I'm literally taking notes. Like I gotta go and read up on this stuff so that I have my own background. I'm sorry to derail this, but oh my god, I'm just sitting here like hands in like chin in hands, like mouth hanging open, taking notes, going what? Oh my lord. Okay. Okay. Now that I'm caught up on McCarthyism.
Yes. Wortham's book caught the eye of various members of Congress, most notably Senator, and I am going to struggle my way through this pronunciation, Kefauver? Kefauver? Kefauver. Please note, I am dyslexic. That name is playing hell with me. So from here on out, I will simply refer to him as the senator. He was a Democratic senator from Tennessee at the time. And Wortham ended up testifying before Congress to this senator. And I think one of the more ridiculous things from the testimony is that a quote from Wortham himself. And when he was speaking to the senator, he said that comic books scared him more than Hitler did. And the quote is, well, I have to say that, Senator, but I think Hitler was a beginner compared to the comic book industry. They get children that much. They get the children much younger.
That's
that Wortham was in such a fervor about the alleged dangers of the industry that they frightened him more than Hitler. And now keep in mind, Wortham was from Germany and he had come to the United States. So he had probably, firsthand, air quote, experience of living under or dealing with the rise of Nazism. I will have to double check when he came to the United States, but the Nazis didn't just pop up in 1939. They had been, it had been a steady rise since the end of World War I.
Wow.
But
and this is the guy.
To testify,
this is the guy who has made. Sorry, I'm just like, oh my god. And this is the guy who wrote this book sensationalizing comics and had put such a strain and had gotten like the literal Congress like of the United States of America involved in regulating comics. This is
and for clarification a little bit, Senator Kefauver, I'm just, like I said, dyslexic, name is messing with me here. He may have had a alternative agenda because this particular senator was very anti-mob or organized crime, and it is alleged that the comic book industry may have had ties to that. I'm not sure. My research didn't take me far enough down that rabbit hole, but he may have had an alternative agenda.
Wow.
But again, I would have to do more research on that. But even like my mind is just blown, and having reread large sections of the book and doing more research onto the hearings and whatnot, the fact that Wortham is claiming that the comic book industry was worse than Hitler because of the supposed messages it was sending children, that because there were instances with very violent criminals and truly bad people, that this was going to encourage children to go out and be delinquents and do these violent crimes. And it is hard to summarize the extent of the claims in this book. I mean, this is just the surface of the surface. These are the most sensationalistic cliff notes that I could, string together, because if we did a deep dive into this book, Kai, we would be here for weeks.
I mean, we're going to do a weekly show. We could totally do a couple of massive deep dives if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
I got to read it, though.
I would be very interested. I would be very interested if a modern day psychiatrist were to deconstruct the book from our understanding of mental health now.
It would be very interesting.
I would be very interested to see that. I am not a psychiatrist by any stretch of the imagination, mind you. But I'm just remarking that would genuinely be something very interesting to see, because, the psychiatric medicine has come so far.
Yeah, no.
But
I
and one of the most one of another, I can't say most, but one of another ridiculous thing about these congressional hearings is that they were televised. These were televised hearings. So the book and the hearings caused a moral panic among parents. It made the front page of the New York Times. The comic industry and their alleged influence on children was thrust onto the front page of one of the most major newspapers in America. And this is where crap gets bad for comics, because after the publication of the book, from what I could see, over a dozen-ish publishers went out of business because the comic industry tanked. And this left the industry in shock. So the remaining publishers kind of rallied together and, were trying to, think of everything that they could to appease the parents who were in a panic and, Wortham with his crusade. How the hell do they stop this? So they voluntarily created what we know today as the Comic Code Authority, that this was a list of tenets that each publisher would abide by. They would exclude these topics, that kind of a thing. And it was the introduction of the Comic Code Authority that effectively ended the Golden Age.
So this is like the first real major instance of actual censorship happening in an art medium. In a medium that was more than just aimed at adults, aimed at kids. Like, this is actual censorship in action.
Yes, it is.
With all of this stuff, with all of these publishers crashing and this huge, massive bust. Wow. So this is actual censorship, not like the fake censorship that people talk about now. And this was an actual moral panic, that literally caused the decline of this industry. And really completely changed the face of what we have as comics now. Now, is the...
because,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, because, I have a very, I have a very large affinity for the Golden Age of comics. And I have a very large collection of, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman Golden Age books. But I also have a Golden Age collection for Jill Trent Science Sleuth, who was a girl science detective with her best friend, and these two girls would go around and solve science crimes. I have Betty Bates, Lady Lawyer, I believe is the title of the book. But the character Betty Bates was in the 40s, she was a prosecutor who carried a gun and knew jujitsu, and, would hunt down criminals.
Are these reprints?
Use her jujitsu.
Are these like reprinted that we can get now in the stores? Like, if I walk into a decent comic shop and go, "Hi, I'm looking for the Golden Age comic. What is it? Lady Lawyer Betty Bates."
The thing, Betty Bates, Lady at Law, I think. The thing is that some of these Golden Age publishers that did go out of business, these works are in the public domain. And these works have largely been lost to history.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Gwandaland.com, or, just Gwandaland in general, they have dedicated themselves to the tireless effort of finding, PDFs or even physical issues of some of these books and basically photocopying them and combining them into these massive volumes. For Jill Trent, Science Sleuth, the only issue that they are missing in the entire series is her first appearance.
Wow.
In Betty Bates, it is they have everything. And here's an interesting tidbit about Betty Bates, is that before the introduction of Daredevil, Matt Murdock, she was the longest running lawyer in comics. Because, she ran, her stories ran for 10 years.
Wow. Okay. So...
And the Comic Code Authority crushed stories like this.
Huh. So before we get into actually
and
what the...
if you...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if you want to look for these volumes, I have not found them in stores. I have found them on Amazon. My wife got me the Betty Bates book for Christmas. I will have to talk to her about where she got it. But since these are independently published, I don't know if they have been able to make it to stores yet.
So before we get back to what I was going to say was, before we get back to actually what the Comics Code Authority did to comics, is it still around today, or has it sort of been replaced by the new rating system of that we get on video games and some of the comics, how they're rated T+?
It's a bit of a mixed issue, because the Comic Code Authority began to wane in significance throughout, the years.
Okay.
Many comic fans and whatnot will argue that the code was effectively busted in 84, 85, where we saw the rise of books like Watchmen.
Oh, okay.
But publishers like DC would hold on to a version of the Comic Code Authority until the early 2000s. Now, that that system is very different from the system they established in the 50s, that, alterations were made and things were changed. But, some of the list that I have here is a very limited list of what the code was set up to be in the mid 50s. And I'd actually like to do another episode just talking about the progression of the Comic Code Authority.
I'm down for that. I'm always...
Because it's a lot of different iterations. And it's what gave the Silver Age the narrative that it did. And it gave rise to allegories, really, in comics. The overabundant use of Silver Age allegories.
Mm-hmm.
But as of today, the Comic Code Authority is effectively gone.
Oh. Okay.
And it has been replaced with a new rating system that is similar to the video game ESRB ratings. So, but here in my handy dandy notes, I have a list of what the Comic Code Authority that was set up by the publishers at the time included, but not limited to, keep in mind. A crackdown on quote-unquote sexy images, no nude images, because in the Golden Age there were some instances of not quite nudity, but they were shadowed, if that makes any sense. They were concealed in shadow, but you could tell.
Like the bat dick?
No, you couldn't actually see anything, but you kind of knew it was there.
Yeah, no, like the bat dick redux. When they edited it.
Yeah, when they edited it out, it was something like that.
Okay.
Another tenet was that criminals should always be bad and should never triumph over good. That the bad guy always had to be defeated, because if it were the opposite, if the bad guys or the criminals, overcame the hero to beat them, or if they won in the end, that this would encourage children to go be bad. Authority figures, cops, government officials, government organizations should always be respected, because again, to do otherwise would be to treat children, would be to influence children to treat the police with disrespect, for example. No slang or vulgar language, so no swearing, no slang terms.
Right.
It banned homosexuality and, ironically, divorce.
Well,
The earliest introduction.
They wanted it to be a good,
to
obviously.
uphold moral.
Yes. We're making the exact same point.
Yeah.
They
wanted to promote the moral traditional family, so you couldn't mention divorce or homosexuality. Like I said, because this is a very small list compared to what it actually entailed, but a ban on comics dealing with racial and religious prejudice. And while this sounds good on the surface, the CBLDF, or the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which is an organization that actually fights censorship in comics, they put out a quarterly. I think it's quarterly. They put out a little quarterly reader. You can donate to them anytime a creator is being censored, or if a publisher wants to censor material, relating to pretty much anything race, homosexuality. The CBLDF is there to defend them, and they provide services to help defend creators as well. These people are absolute heroes, in my opinion. But to this point about a ban dealing on racial and religious prejudice, the CBLDF pointed out is that this also served to eliminate stories that challenged religious beliefs and reduced the representation of non-white people, because the easiest way to avoid racial prejudice is to just not have people of color. And, this is a stance that would wane a little bit over the years, because another episode I want to do is a controversial is not a severe enough word to describe this issue, but is an issue of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, where Lois wants to interview people in a black neighborhood, which in the comic book, I am quoting the book here, but in the neighborhood, quote, Little Africa. But when Lois goes to try to speak to them, they will not speak to her because she's white. So she then jumps in this fancy machine that turns her into a black woman.
That's
And then she goes back into the neighborhood. And I want to do an episode just based around that one issue, because it is not like, that ain't it, Chief. Like, right. It is as painful and as cringy as you think it is.
Can we go back for 1 second?
Go for it.
Can we talk about the criminals always try, like, they should never triumph over the good guys. Were comics less serialized back then? Were they more like one and done monster of the week stories, like they were on, like Batman 66 on TV and stuff?
It depends on the character, but largely yes.
Okay, because I'm just like, from a storytelling standpoint, that would really ruin. That's like, you have these 18 pages or whatever, 12 pages or 24 pages, whatever it is. It's like, you have this many pages, tell your story, the bad guy has to lose at the end. That limits a lot, really, if they were less serialized. It's just...
Well, here's an interesting example for you. That Golden Age Wonder Woman was, she was out there, she was fighting Nazis, she was fighting bad guys, she was teaching girls that they could be just as powerful as boys. And then after the Comic Code Authority, when, in one of the early branches of the Justice League, she was the team secretary. She didn't get to go out and fight with the guys. She was the secretary. She had to stay in. There is a panel from one issue where she laments the fact that she can't go out and fight with them.
Because of the CCA.
That is one example. Say what?
Because of the CCA being enacted.
Yes.
Oh my
God.
I did know that. I have seen that was a meme for a while, and I'm just like, what is this? What am I reading? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No, that's a real panel. And there are certain elements that do tie into Wonder Woman and her history, especially when someone like Robert Kanger took over the book. It is a whole thing that I am very excited to get into in another episode.
I'm very excited to get into that.
That's one example of the way comics were affected by the CCA, was that, you go from this powerful hero to secretary. And, no disrespect to secretaries. And I'm not trying to demean the position of a secretary, but the stereotypical woman as a secretary thing. At one point in her history, Wonder Woman gives up her superpowers to be a secret agent / supermodel.
Now you're making this up.
That, these...
Now you're just...
I am not making
this shit up just to mess with me. That can't be real.
No.
That's a real thing? Oh my god.
She becomes like a supermodel secret agent.
I'm going to bed. This doesn't work for me.
Yeah. But kind of starting to wrap up the episode a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I have said a couple times before, the CCA began to wane over the years and was largely busted in the mid to late 80s. After that bust, we started to see the rise of certain LGBT characters, Maggie Sawyer being a prime example, who, everybody knew she was gay, but they never said the word lesbian because, after the code was busted in the 80s, in the early 90s, Maggie Sawyer became the first LGBT character to headline a solo series, if you will, because the before issue limited series Metropolis SCU focused specifically on Maggie Sawyer and her the fact that she was the captain of the Major Crimes Unit, the fact that she has to babysit Lois Lane, and more specifically, her relationship with her girlfriend or long-term partner and her ex-husband and her teenage daughter. So, within 10 years of the code largely being busted, we saw a major shift in stories. Karma from the X-Men, we got to see her come out. And so you have decades of the CCA kind of having their thumb on the scale of comics. And like I said, I want to do an episode of the CCA and kind of the rise of allegory in comics, because, if you want to talk about allegory in comics, the first thing that jumps into your brain is the X-Men, and I so want to get into the X-Men. But anyway, I need to rein myself in because I'm getting a little too excited here.
Like your excitement. I want your excitement. I am excited to be on this journey with you, of you, messing with me, but not because I don't believe that 2/3 of what you're saying is true. And I'm like over in the Google going, oh my God. I had no idea.
And, these are effects on the industry because of Wortham's book that, we are still seeing today that, comics are a kid's venture, or, the moral panic and the think of the children as you wave your finger. Like, it was a more intense-ish version of, do violent video games have a negative effect on children? Tipper Gore in the 90s and the fight to put parental advisory labels on music, on CDs.
Yeah.
If, they swore too much. And I think the parental advisory stickers are still used to this day. That this was a prime example of the way moral panic contributes to censorship. And this is why we've taken the name of the book, because this is one of the most impactful things on comic books, because this one book changed the landscape for decades. And this is why we took the name, to strike at the heart of our message that, this isn't just, let's talk about this, that, or the other thing. It's like, no, comics have reflected the world around us, and this was a reaction to the book. And this is what I want to do. I've been a little rambly this episode. Like I said, I didn't, I think I just get so overwhelmed myself. And, like I said, you put me in front of a microphone and I just fall apart.
Well, we're excited to be here, and there's so much to cover.
Yes.
And this being our first episode, we really wanted to lay the groundwork for what you can expect from us coming forward, or moving forward in our next episodes. And I'm looking at the chat right now, and Demented for Fun is just assuring me that, yeah, this is all true, and it's mind-breaking. And yeah, I'm sitting here just listening, like, I'm reading over these notes again, and you're telling me these things, you're telling all of us, we're talking about this, and I'm just sitting here going, what? What is even happening? I didn't know. And I gotta admit, I am very much like, I'm the kind of person who, like, reads a comic and I'm done with it. Maybe I'll read it a second time if I really like it. But so to hear that, comics used to be a newsstand thing, and comics in the 30s and 40s were so completely different from even the 90s, is, I mean, obviously, aside from the obvious difference, but just hearing the progression, I'm sitting here going, oh my goodness, oh my God, like, there's so much, I'm stammering, and I am all mind blown here too, and so thank you for, giving me this, like, crash course and giving us all of this information. This has been really fun and very educational, and I can't wait for our next thing. And
like I said, this is just the surface of the surface of the surface of this book. I found a digital copy of the PDF online at scribd.com, SCRI.
Don't
I signed
that.
Oh yeah, but no, I got a membership there.
Yeah.
And because I got a membership and I was able to download the book. It is legal.
Oh, is Scribd
so
legal?
like I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I gave them money and they gave me a book. So, because actual hard copies of the book are a little difficult to find. You can find them, but I was not going to pay like $30 for a copy. So, again, I assume they're legal. I gave them money. They gave me a PDF. But if you can find a copy of the book, I highly suggest you do it. Because, like I said, this is the surface of the surface. And if we went into it in depth, I think my brain would start to melt out of my ears, because these claims were, I'm just going to say it, these claims are irresponsible and they're dangerous, and it affected this industry with such heavy censorship to the point that we're still having some of these conversations. Because of this one guy, we are still having so many of these conversations. And this is why we want to look at comics as a whole and see what has impacted them over the years. And we felt it important to start with this because, this arguably is one of the most important things. And from there, we should probably wrap up the show.
Sounds good. Let's wrap it up.
Oh, thank you, Doc Jones 11. Thank you. Yeah, Doc Jones 11 in the chat says it's very sad, and I think this is a genius podcast to have. Thank you very much. I am very excited to continue this.
I'm excited to be here for what it's worth.
Yes. Yes.
I'm just here for the ride, you guys. I'm here to break up the monotony and be like,
I have a couple.
What you talking about, Mary?
Yeah. I have a couple episodes almost fully written out. I'm not sure which one we'll do next, but you can follow me on Twitter at Sapphic Geek. I will be talking more about the show and, what episodes that I have mostly written. There's a lot more research I have to dig into. But, I'm seriously considering cleaning up my outline a little bit and posting the show notes on the website. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, I think we should totally do that. I think people would dig.
I don't know, Kai. What do you think?
Nothing. I never think of anything. Did my audio just like stop?
You cut for a minute.
Oh, okay. I was saying, no, yeah, we should totally do that. I think that would be an interesting thing to do. And Doc Jones 11 is in the chat saying, do it.
Mm-hmm. I just need to clean them up a little bit, but because I have like notes for me specifically and for Kai, and I just want to take some of those out. But no, it's the outline I'm actually very proud of it.
It was very good. I have had fun. I have had fun tonight. Thank you for setting this all up. This has been great.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's do it.
So, is there anything you want to say to close out the show?
No, I think I'm just. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this crazy journey. It has been
yes,
a very educational night. We'll be back. We'll be running this Monday nights. No, sorry, Friday nights. I do aggressive negotiations on Monday night.
Yes.
No.
And actually, I was just going to jump in real quick, and, while we're here and we're talking on the live stream, and I'm, hoping that more people will be listening to this after the fact, because this is going to be on YouTube, and then within a couple of weeks, I'm hoping to be able to have it up on Spotify and iTunes. But since we're here in the live stream, Doc Jones 11 and Demented for Fun are both hanging out with us. Is there anything that you two want to see potentially covered?
Yeah, just let us know in the chat. You can also
yes.
You can also hit us up on Twitter. Mary is at Sapphic Geek, and I'm at Raggedy Author. You can also shoot us messages over on Twitter at On Comics Ground, which is the channel that is hosting us. And you can find more of this content over on our website, oncomicsground.com. There's hyphens in between all of the words. So if you've got any suggestions,
yes, please let us know.
Let us know. And and then join us here on the channel every Friday night for more of this. And if you want to get, other programming, Saturday night Mary is on Panel to Panel, which is a comics news.
Panel to Panel. Yes.
Yeah, so that's Saturday night. So tomorrow night from live recording. Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern.
You should check on. You should pop in on that, because I have to scream about this Batwoman trailer. So yes, please come and watch me have a panic attack because of the trailer's awesomeness.
And then Monday night. I do aggressive negotiations on Monday nights, which is a Star Wars podcast. And we would love to see you there for that as well. But this has been fantastic. Please do message us on Twitter or through the website. Check out the website. That's really all I've got to say. Mary, do you got anything else to say?
First of all, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone. This has been a passion project that I have wanted to do for a very long time. And, being able to do this research and to talk about it means a lot to me. And I know it means a lot to my wife, because I'm not just talking at her about it. And I think she really appreciates that. So yes, please harass me on Twitter with topics that you have, because I'm always looking for more, and I find that I learn a lot doing the research too, and I'm always down for learning more things. So thank you for coming on today's journey, and I really do hope you come back for more. So, and with that, we should probably say our goodbyes.
All right, well, this has been fun. Thank you again, everybody. We will see you guys next week. Have a great night, everybody. I said we will see everybody next week.
Yep.
Oh, my God.
Bye-bye.
Bye.